Okay, this is Hyaku Shiki 96 and today we're going to discuss some key collecting advice that I would like to give as somebody who's been video game collecting for over 13 years. Now the list today is not going to be an exhaustive list, but it's kind of going to be the main lessons that I focused on and learned that I think aren't talked about enough. And so of course, there are some things that I am going to miss out due to the time constraints and the scope of the video, so if you do want to add anything, please make sure to do so in the comments. And of course, if you do like, please subscribe so you can see more content coming in the future. Alright, let's go. Okay, so as an overview, I've collected over 350 different games between several both handheld and home consoles, and I've been collecting for about 13 years. Now, the one thing I do want to mention before we get started is that we need to recognise that game collecting and video games are a separate hobby. They're both interrelated and about the same subject matter, but game collecting focuses on actually buying and owning physical games, whereas of course video games can be had whether you own them, whether you don't. It's all about playing the games. And so game collecting does have a little bit of a difference that I do want to acknowledge. Okay, the first thing that I really want to talk about is something that I would call the novelty factor. So if you're interested in starting a video game collection, or you're interested in about how much time and energy you should dedicate to your video game collection, it all focuses on that novelty factor. Now, if you like, for example, inserting cartridges into consoles, opening the trays and putting the discs in, if you enjoy the experience of actually getting a game off the shelf and looking at them before you pick one to play, then physical collecting definitely has a huge advantage for you. If you enjoy reading through manuals, looking at artwork, that's a good way to determine whether it is for you. Now of course, this doesn't focus necessarily on the enjoyment of the games, these are more the elements around it. Collecting is not a cheap hobby, and so if you do want to pursue it, you do need to kind of know where you stand on those things. And of course, the other element really is, do you like building displays? Are you interested in that kind of thing as well? That's another novelty factor that we will go into a bit more detail later on in the video, so stay tuned for that. So now you've established whether that novelty factor has an impact on whether you want to collect. Now, it's not the sole reason as to why you should collect, but I do think it helps you to get the most out of your collecting. And another thing that helps you get the most out of your collecting is what I'd like to call intention. By intention, what I mean is that you actually need to focus on the reasons as to why you're collecting in the first place. Game collecting takes up a lot of time and also a lot of money, so you really need to focus on the reasons behind if you want to get the best value. For me, when I'm travelling around the country, visiting independent shops or different chains, or hunting online, trying to find a good deal for a game I'm desperate to play, it definitely has a great effect on me if I know why I actually want the game in the first place. My intention is all about having loads of games to play. My criteria of whether it gets into my collection or not is, do I want to play it? Does it look like something I'd enjoy? And will I play it in the near future? Now, it's not important when you play it, right? You could play it tomorrow, a week, a year. What it really matters is that by the end of the time you've used that game, you felt like it was a worthwhile experience. There are some games that I haven't liked and enjoyed in my collection and got rid of, but I don't regret it because I feel like I made the decision carefully. The next part of intention that I want to focus on really is just about a measure that you can use to make decisions. Now, not everyone has to have the same intention of me. I really like having lots of games to choose from, and so I'm kind of spoilt for choice. In the same way that you might enjoy having a film library so that you can kind of go with the mood, that's me with games really. Your purpose might be different. You might really want to explore a specific game library and try things that you've never tried before. So you could collect, for example, all sorts of puzzle and simulation games. So there are lots of ways that you can go, but I really think it does help, especially when we consider there are tens of thousands of physical games available in the UK. It's honestly so hard to pick what you want. With that out of the way, let's move on to the next point. The place where I would recommend that all intention leads is to playing the games. Now, one of the main things and advantages to video games is the great amount of time you're able to get out of a purchase. I mean, some games that cost between £1 to £10, you can get upwards of 20, 50 hours of. that's a great value for your money. So ultimately where I'm leading with this intention is my recommendation is, whilst you have intentions about collecting, everything leads back to playing the games. That's where you feel like you get the most value and meaning out of your collection. It certainly is for me. So what I would recommend is that you play the games that you buy, and you buy the games that you want to play. Now what the little monikers are around that is totally up to you. Now that we've established intention and suitability, I think the next thing we need to focus on is about sustainability. I've kind of mentioned off and on throughout the video so far that it is an expensive hobby, and I certainly think it is. Now there's lots of arguments on how to use your money effectively, and there are definitely some budget friendly options there, meaning that the hobby, whilst it is expensive, it's definitely accessible. However, one of the things that you do have to know is that games add up. Even though there are budget options, as you continue to collect them over time, the money does add up. So eventually it is one that you will spend a significant amount of money on. So it really makes sense that you think carefully about the decisions that you make. What I'm not suggesting is that you can't have fun and spend a good amount of money, and that you can't have fun and spend a little money. You have to budget and think carefully about your own situation. So one of the things that I've seen on YouTube is that sometimes some people build some fantastic collections and then have to sell them. And so because of that, you've got to think carefully about making sure that you use the right amount of your disposable income to get those gains. I think personally some of my favourite experiences are built around budgeting and pricing carefully. One game that I've got, Castlevania The Dracula X Chronicles on the PSP, my most valuable game on that system, I got for £50. So I actually negotiated down the shop from £60. What it was is that I noticed it'd been on the shelves for about 4 to 6 months. I really wanted that game, but I didn't feel like £60 was worth it. So I approached them and asked if they'd be comfortable with me offering that price. They said yes, and I took it away and I got a fantastic deal. So that fit my budget at the time perfectly. I was able to manage and not encroach on finances that I needed for saving up for other things, and so that's what I'd recommend really. I think the stories where you think intentionally and you buy something that you really like, using your money well, is something that will get you a lot of satisfaction. One thing I do want to add on and say is that I'm not promoting any guilt for people who perhaps are less intentional with their spending. Now, depending on your situation, again, it might be different. There's a lot of assumptions to make. I feel like for the average person though, having some constraints there definitely helps. My little moniker that I use is I like to say no more than I say yes, meaning that there are more games that I turn down than I buy. Now that might not suit you, and that is totally fine. The ultimate thing is that when you're having fun game collecting, it doesn't encroach and leave you any negative consequences. The last thing I want is to sell my collection, at least until I no longer want to use it, if that day happens. So I think that it's important to bear that in mind. The next thing I want to focus on, and my next main point, is spontaneity. I've referenced a lot about things like planning. Now, I do think that it's important to plan, to a degree anyway. Do your research. I think that's part of the fun of the hobby for me. Discovering new kinds of genres, titles, series, learning all about them. It helps me look forward to using the game and not just kind of having an impulse purchase that I don't look at or use again. However, I do think it's actually important to have a bit of spontaneity. So, a good example of this is that earlier this year I played A Zone of the Enders on the PlayStation 2. Now I actually picked up this game knowing next to nothing about it. I just really like mech games. I really like mecha as a genre across animation, across books, all sorts of things. So for me, I kind of looked at it, saw that it fit the bill, and decided to make an impulse purchase. I can tell you, I definitely am very glad, and I liked going into it blind. So I do feel like whilst you should plan the general thrust of your collection to make sure that you are spending effectively, and that you're not perhaps wasting money in places that you won't feel satisfied with later personally, I do feel like as well you should leave some fun for discovering things, for looking at games, finding them, and of course being able to have a new experience. A good example of one I recently bought spontaneously was Chaos Legion on the PS2. I never heard of that game, but the art style and the CG on the back definitely drew me in, and so I've heard that it's a hidden gem after doing a little bit of research. I'm going to play that eventually in the near future, and I'm probably going to quite enjoy it. And so I think that's some fun as well. Just being able to balance that careful forethought and planning with some discovering new titles and enjoying them. In other words, I'm saying I think there's some fun to be had in moderation. Don't put the brakes on too hard. don't tap on them too lightly either. Enjoy some planning and some spontaneity. So the next tip I've got here is more suited to more mid to long term collectors, and that is one word that you guys will have definitely heard before: curate. Now, when it comes to curating your collection, what that really means is to re-evaluate and keep stock of what you actually have. I keep an Excel spreadsheet where I have every single game that I own, how many times I've completed it, how long it takes to complete, and other kinds of money related factors, just to kind of track the data that I'm interested in. However, it helps me to make decisions on curating my collection. So if there's a game that I buy that I have the intention to play, and then that doesn't pan out the way I'd hope, or perhaps I lose interest, or that I don't like it as much, and I play it once and I'm kind of done with it, keeping track and kind of re-evaluating allows me to then save the space that I have, that finite amount of space, for something that I enjoy more. Some games I find that I come back to and I want to really keep those games in my collection, but other games I might play them once and I'm kind of happy with it. For me, I want to prioritise games that I find myself coming back to, or that I can see myself coming back to multiple times. In other words, I feel like curating is a way that you can really keep that collection meaningful in the medium to long term. The reason I say this is because you're always going to discover new games as you go through the hobby. It's certainly the same with me. There are some games that I've found out about and bought this year, such as the Onimusha series, that I didn't know existed before. Those kinds of opportunities are going to come. So thinking about and evaluating your collection carefully means that you're able to actually have iterations of your collection that become more and more enjoyable and suit your current needs. One of the things that everyone does eventually get faced with, and I mean everyone gets faced with this problem without exception, is the space. Eventually you do run out. There is a finite amount that you can have, and so being able to curate allows that finite amount to be really, really meaningful, and of course to be fun. Part of the hobby I like is actually buying the games, researching them, finding new ones, and so being able to cycle out games that I'm done with allows me to continue to have that experience. And so it's a thing that I'd recommend that everybody do. Okay, so now I want to talk about the last point of this video, and I think it's kind of a little bit of an underdeveloped topic in the hobby at the moment, and that's displaying. Okay, now you're probably saying to me, whoa, I display my games. Yes, most people in this hobby do display their games. So I'm not talking about the actual act of displaying them. What I'm talking about is curating and planning those displays. So as you can see, some B-roll footage now concerning my game room. My game room, I spent many hours on actually planning, trying out different ideas that allow me to get the most out of my space and kind of make it an aesthetically pleasing style that for me manages to balance really being able to actually have things easily viewable. I don't just want to throw a bunch of games on a shelf and call it a day. And whilst I do think a lot of games really do look quite nice on shelves, what I'm trying to suggest is I actually like building displays around some of my favourite franchises. In fact, the shelves right behind me here are full of that exact thing. I've got different kinds of things like figures, the games themselves, even some DVDs, built around some of my favourite franchises. I love displaying them, and I really think that it's a cool thing to do. So one thing that I would recommend that you actually do with your displays is, rather than trying to fit the most amount of things possible, is try and make it the most aesthetic possible. What you'll find there is, again, it really highlights those meaningful things that you enjoy about the hobby, like game art allows you to have room for things like figures and build some really cool, dynamic and interesting displays. But I do think it presents another advantage as well, and that is that you really feel proud of your space. What you'll find is when you have things that are displayed well, you end up owning a kind of better amount of things. I could, for example, fill all these shelves behind me, front and back row, full of games. I could fit a lot more in here, but instead, this shelf has turned into a celebration of some of my favourite games and franchises of all time. And so for me, coming and having a look at these displays kind of makes my game room not just feel like a place where I put games, but a room where I'm actually able to enjoy and think about all these kinds of franchises and positive memories that I have enjoying what the world of entertainment has to offer. So in other words, again, I think that's a bit different for everybody. Some people might enjoy the display side of it a bit less than I do, but I really like kind of having a little mini museum kind of feel to this room, but also prioritizes accessibility as well. You might want to focus on getting the best amount of items. Again, it depends on what kind of space you have. I think that building the nice looking displays has allowed me to get a lot more satisfaction out of this hobby, so that's why I want to recommend that other people try it. I think that there are many talented people out there who haven't really discovered their ability to build curated aesthetic displays. It makes me enjoy spending time here just looking at stuff. And again, that's part of why I got into the hobby in the first place, right? This is about more than just the games themselves. It's about what they represent, the work and the talent that went into them, that went into this physical packaging. I really want to appreciate it. And so I feel that building these displays and collecting in general allows me to do that. What are your thoughts about game collecting? What advice would you give to somebody else? I think there are a lot of things that we could say, and of course, if you'd like me to add some more things or do another video on this topic, I'm more than happy to. But for now, those are kind of my main points that I would suggest. I've really found a lot of satisfaction in the hobby, and it's made me enjoy it for so long, doing it the way that I do now. And so, of course, it's been your favourite billionaire philanthropist, Hyaku Shiki 96. I'm about to go and jump on the yacht in Monaco and go sailing, so I will see you next time.